15, and I'll call this meeting to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a pretty packed agenda, so we're going to try and move this along today. We're going to start with the approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda. Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Moving on to the consent agenda, approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of January 9th, 2024, and approval of claims for January 23rd.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any public comment today? Nobody in the room? No hands? Okay, there'll be public comments later, near the end of the meeting, so we will move on to the general manager's report.
Just a couple of quick updates, commissioners. First, BP is getting some water contracts. That they bought some land and there's some water contracts that go with the land. So we're working through all the issues on getting those contracts assigned over to BP, and we'll be bringing something back to you in we hope a couple of weeks. We're still trying to get more clarification from BP on exactly what they want. The second issue is that we're continuing to work with AltaGas on the Hydrogen Hub project. And where that plays out for us right now is the proposed electrolyzer project is both a big electric load, but it's also a big water load. And we're looking something north of a couple of million gallons a day. So it would be one of our larger customers. And the issue is that Intalco still has some water needs while they're doing the demolition and remediation of the brownfield to a greenfield. And we know that that AltaGas will have water needs in the future. So we're trying to rebuild the meter manifold so that all of that can be accommodated now. And that'll be a fairly expensive project. But the driver on this is going to be AltaGas and Intalco and what they want. And we're still trying to get the details of that from that. So more to follow. And in terms of the electrolyzer project itself, we've got no update at this point. Any questions about that?
So it's still being explored rather than being solid. At this point.
We're not exactly sure where it is with AltaGas, and I'm not trying to characterize it. The issue for us is that the project now requires some changes to our water system, and we're trying to get from them exactly what they want. We hope that the whole thing's a go. We just don't know what their hydrogen considerations are. They need to figure that out. Last thing, it's a real simple one. I'm going to be off starting late this afternoon. Should be back in the office Tuesday morning, and Brian will have full authority, and I'll be more or less reachable, but I'll probably not be reading my email but once a day or so. That's it for me. Any questions?
So if you could just email me for next week another time, because our point.
Yeah,
time is more.
and Jamie, ours for tomorrow night. I'm not going to be able to make.
That's
So
fine.
okay.
Yep. Thank you. All right, let's move to old business. Start with a broadband update. Andrew?
Yeah, why don't we start with Andrew?
Good morning, everyone. For the broadband update for Point Roberts, I'll save for a new business where we'll be looking for an approval of the professional services agreement. But real briefly, just looking forward, we're working to develop project areas for the many upcoming grant opportunities, such as USDA funding like Reconnect, and of course BEAD that we've talked about in great length. The steering committee recently met and agreed that the PUD would be best suited to pursue these grant opportunities, primarily East County. So we're focusing our efforts now on what we need to do to serve East County. There may be other opportunities to fill in the gaps around the port's current projects closer to the cities and towns, but for now that's where we're looking in preparation for the challenge. And so we're reviewing all the providers, self-reported data where they're saying they have gig services, where they're saying they're unserved, and we'll be conducting some field verification of that as well in preparation for everything we just mentioned. So a brief update today, but I'll see you again for new business for approval of an engineering firm. Back to you, Chris.
Just want to add a couple of things. The NOFO for Reconnect, we expect that's the USDA project. We expect the notice of funding opportunity to drop sometime in February. So, once that drops, we've probably got 60 to 90 days to submit. So we need a running start. So that's one of the things that Andrew's working on. In terms of the BEAD update, we got a copy of the final initial report that came out from the broadband office. And I got to say, it's not nearly as bad as I had feared. And yeah, there's actually some hopeful stuff in there. The language was changed so that whoever was the cheapest project in a given project area got 40 points. So that was how they handled the cost. So in terms of, it doesn't matter how you get there. So if you have matching funds that bring you down to that lowest cost, or if you're able to do it more efficiently, then however you get there, that's how you get the points. And so that was really good news. The other thing was there was a little bit of clarity around fiber to the home is the preferred way to do it. And that if the price got over a certain break point, then they would consider hybrid systems. The problem is that you don't know what that break point is. They haven't published it. So one of the things that we're thinking about is actually putting in 2 project bids for each area, one being a fiber to the home, the other being hybrid. So if all the fiber to the home bids are above the break point, boom, we've got the hybrid offer on the table. And that may be a really good way to approach some of these areas. But we don't know if they're going to allow 2 bids for the same project area from a single entity. That's not clear. It also appears that as we will not be required to be an ISP for 2 years. They also cleaned up the language on that so that if you're an electric utility, an electric PUD, that's sufficient. We just have to give them 2 years of financials to prove that we're a going concern. So a lot of the things I was really, really worried about. And we got to thank Angela Bennick and Wakuda and the Port Association. They did yeoman's work pushing for all these changes. And it worked. So, yeah.
Yeah. So we are now certain that we will be able to apply for BEAD.
Well, we've always been certain we could apply, but I think we'll be a lot more competitive now, given the changes they've made.
Okay, so I've sent the report to the commission and that, I was tracking the NOAANET request to us. And I just wanted to make sure that we weren't closing or opening any doors that would, reduce the likelihood of getting success. So I've had multiple conversations with Chris about this, I've had conversations with NOAANET, and basically all we didn't have to do anything as a commission. The option of collaborating with NOAANET if there's a reason to, as we move past the challenge process, is there for us. Same thing with WASAC, the Association of Counties and Cities. So I just wanted to clarify that. So I kind of said that we needed to do something in response to the survey, but we really don't need to do it. Okay.
Yeah, and if I may, just add on to that a little bit, if we end up running kind of call center and truck roll operations and stuff like that, we'll be looking for a third party. And if there's not a real handy third party, like for instance, Woodby-Tel at Point Roberts might be the logical one if they're willing to take on those services for us, knowing that's the natural provider for those things for us. And they're willing to do that in general. You have to get a proposal for a specific issue, but that is exactly what they do.
Thank you, Andrew.
If I may, there's 2 things on the franchise that's pending with Whatcom County. Spoke with the county attorney a week ago Monday and resolved the outstanding issues. If you will recall, the issue was that they could reserve the right to charge a franchise fee to any lessee of fiber, which would be a problem for us in that if we still controlled the fiber and we leased out some strands of a fiber to a third party or lease the whole, it may defeat the business case to serve these underserved areas. And their issue is really the sale of the fiber, that they could require a franchise, the buyer to get a franchise. I said, that's not an issue for Port or the PUD. Recall, I'm splitting my time between the Port and the PUD on this because it's an identical franchise for both. I expected it to be on the agenda tonight, the council meeting. It's not. And I've asked the county attorney when he expects that to come on now. Haven't heard.
Thank you. Next is an adjudication update.
Okay, so spent a lot of time in the last 2 weeks. We'll talk some maybe real briefly in an executive session, but a lot on the pending legislation and discussing rules for procedure. I've had a couple conversations with the administration of courts on rules of procedure, and the county bar committee has commenced. There's roughly 20 lawyers. Most have limited experience in water law. Water law code is set up separately from the general codes with the courts. And I've had a lot of discussions with Lummi Council, with our own team. I spoke to the attorney for Enfield, Mayberry, spoke with other attorneys representing Birch Bay Water and Sewer District and some others about potential rules. And I can really dive into the nuances at some point on what lawyers are concerned about. I see your head shaking. No, not now. We're on the time gun. I don't think that's not today. But I will legislative update. I'll just transition into that if I can.
Sure.
Because there's 2 issues there. 5817, Senate Bill, I think it's 5817, which is the 5th judge. I appeared a couple weeks ago in pro on that. I went to, it's going to Ways and Means. I saw Commissioner Deshmani appeared for the PUD pro for the 5th judge on that in Ways and Means. So I didn't bother entering a position since the PUD had. So that is moving through quickly, and I expect to go back over the House quickly and move forward. That's a simple bill that just adds a 5th judge. The one that's more complex is 5828, and the one we've made comments on. And I've had extensive discussions with attorneys for the Lummi as well as others about this and our concerns. So again, this was a bill that started off with the concept, well, we're not going to require parties to consent to a referee. A referee is similar to a court commissioner, but not identical. And candidly, the legislation doesn't really spell out the difference between a referee and a court commissioner. So it appears there's 3 hierarchies of decision makers. A referee that typically would just kind of decide balls and strikes, the facts, if you will, of a case, and then make reports to a judge. It seems to be the same role of what a water court commissioner would do, trying to sort out what that difference would be, and then a superior court judge. So there was some concern that parties had to consent to a referee to hear their case. A referee doesn't have to be a designated constitutional court commissioner, could be contracted by attorneys with experience. So I think that's one of the flexibilities the county and the administration of course looking at. The dilemma, when if parties had to consent, they could put a wrench in the process of efficiency. So the courts wanted to eliminate that provision. What they did though, was they referred to the referee statute, which is RCW 448. That has provisions in there that talk about allocating costs of the referee to the parties. So imagine, if you will, they decided to use a referee to use all the small wells to try to move those through the adjudication quickly, determine what the historical use was, and set the adjudicative certificate recommendation. And then someone comes along and says, well, assess the cost of the parties. That would be a surprise and not what was intended. So we objected to that. We said, also, we think you need to prioritize adjudication cases amongst all other cases. And if you're going to use a referee, we want to write a review of that decision by a superior court judge for a number of reasons. I think historically in Washington, they set up a water code 100 years ago or so to have courts consider adjudication rather than a special board or Department of Hydraulics like other states, because the local farmers, at the time those were 100 years ago doing adjudications, wanted to have their local judge that was elected decide these cases. Now, fast forward, tribes often culturally want to have their matters addressed with the other elected officials. It's one aspect. I think Joe, Sally citizen want to have an elected judge often hear their matter, or at least review the matter, not an appointee of the court. So, and that's the tribes, I think, have a strong view. They want to have someone that the traffic attorneys communicated is they want to strive, a strong judge have the opportunity to review. So those are the objections we made. The administration, so I submitted written testimony closing or as an other on 5828. Explaining this, and I gave you all a bullet sheet on it. Subsequent meetings, subsequent conversations, it wasn't evident at the hearing materials that were on the website, but if you dug through this, AOC Administration of Courts had a substitute bill, and they've eliminated the reference to that statute of concern. Now everything is an amendment to the water code. The local court rules do provide for a right of review, but there's an appellate standard, like the findings of fact have to be supported by substantial evidence, so you don't get a free new hearing. That is some concern to the tribes. We've said it's an improvement. We're gonna wait and see how the tribes come forward on this, rather than really bearing our pick on that issue. The prioritization, surprisingly, on the morning of our bar committee meeting, the local court passed an emergency local rule. Why it's an emergency? There's no case, so why would it be an emergency yet? But it provides for prioritization of adjudication cases amongst anything else that has a priority by the state legislature. So I think from my perspective, that's about as good as we're gonna get. I don't think we're gonna get any legislation on that point passed. I'm talking to the AOC. Candidly, they said they thought the Spokane legislators would oppose a prioritization. They don't want to have an adjudication of the Spokane River prioritized. And so we did not think that would get through the legislature in a new bill. So local rule, I think, is going to be good enough now. I think talking to tribes attorneys, they're kind of got, we want more, but we don't think we're going to get more. So they kind of let it go. So the tribe's position and concerns at this point is that right of review and the reference to a referee, just because the questions it becomes. But I think we're in a much better position than we were 20 days ago. I got into the nuance on that. I'm trying to be efficient, not going all the maneuvers of what lawyers will do in this with these rules, but that's where we're at. And we're still working on the rules. We've developed a large table comparing with the tribes with what the local rules provide, what the RCW provides, what Aquavella's pretrial orders would be, and then what the Lummies would consider based on their experience. And this deals with everything from timing of motions, response to motions, when you bring pretrial motions, a whole host of things. And the concept is, we've sent that to the Lummie Council. They're going to give us our feedback on it. And then we want to try to drive that committee on establishing rules that work for everybody. Rather than having the committee try to divine it, because I don't think it'll ever will. And then you'll have a court without experience in water law trying to establish rules on an adjudication with no experience. So we want to try to push that. So that's where we're at on that. I'd have one copy of the substitute bill. I can have someone make it afterwards and circulate that. Or I can pass it around here. That's the substitute 5820.
I do, but I'm not gonna do it now. I'd like to have you to be able to have a call with you this week to go into this in more depth. Because I want to figure out what the commission's role should be. And to come back to the commission with a suggestion on what that should be. So
What I think what I would say.
like specifically, if you need actions in the next 2 weeks, I want us to have that conversation of what kind of things where we might need to submit testimony or other things to support this process.
What I've done is, as I've seen a committee come up, I've kind of taken what you've conveyed to me and put that on the record in the committee. And just because there isn't time to go poll,
Right.
yeah, and go forward. I think I have a good sense of where the commission is on things. And
I think you do too.
so I tried to measure that here.
But just a lot, you covered a lot. This
Yeah.
is pretty complicated stuff. Yeah.
I don't think there's going to be anything new bills coming up. So I think at this point,
So we think it's gonna pass or not?
I think I would not be surprised if this passes. I would think this will. I think that it's about as good as we're going to get.
Okay.
Unless the Lummies can be effective in killing it. And I've kind of taken the stance, we're supporting you, behind you. Tribe's position on this is going to be loud. If it's silent, it's deafening. If it's vocal, it'll be influential. I think what's been reported to me is that Senator Shoemake is strongly behind this 5820 bill.
Okay, so here's what I'm wondering. Is this at the end of the world if this doesn't pass this
No.
session? Right, we got plenty of time, don't we? And we've got two parties, the PUD and the Lummi Nation negotiating on behalf of the entire state. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of potential for miscommunications or disconnects.
Yeah, I think the Lummies are having their own direct conversations with AOC, as are the Nooksacks. I think Nooksack Council and their lobbyists, Lisa is active on this. And the Lummi Nation's lobbyists and legal counsel have been involved. So I think from my perspective at this point, whether this bill goes or not is going to be largely dependent upon what the tribe's positions are. And I said, we'll be supportive of you, but I don't think we're in a position to lead on this issue, but we'll be supportive. And if they want us to take a more active role, we said we would.
Yeah.
Because they've been slow in communicating what their positions are, because
Yeah.
the attorneys have to go back to their client, talk to their lobbyists. They have to coordinate with Nooksack to see, are they on the same page? And that could be a 10,
That's what I was wondering.
2-week turnaround. So my position has been, you guys tell us where you're at and then we'll follow.
What's important is that we make clear that 5820, the one before this,
58's 17 on
or
the,
27, I thought maybe.
yeah,
but
27, what are the
Yeah.
fifth judge, we've been very clear, we're supportive.
That's,
And we're very supportive of the budget proviso that for the financial capital and infrastructure improvements and operation.
and they just said this one, I don't, I want to be clear, that it's really driven by Lummi, the second bill, not by the
Concerns.
PUD.
At this point, initially, we raised our concerns
Right,
and then kind of had, okay, you resolved it, you worked with us. And they maneuvered, they did make some changes, which we've been supportive. So I'll jump right to legislative update.
I think that
No questions.
I only have something to add to legislative update. Do you have more on legislative update?
I just have one other
Okay.
item.
I'll
So
go after you.
there is a bill that came out, 6206. And if you will recall, and this has to do with water systems and receiverships. So Whatcom County counties by statute have been the receivers of last resort for a failing water system, and it can be often financial. And I think you'll see that more and more. If you look through the PowerPoint on the rate study that Commissioner Deshmani had and Chris circulated, if you look at the rate analysis, we're only going to be seeing increasing rates in private water systems and public water systems. And that will probably lead to more financial failures or receiverships, either by lack of operations or lack of financial support for these small systems, water systems. So the counties have been the receiver of last resort. This is a bill 6206 that changes that to put a PUD or water district as a receiver last resort. And it's and only the county if there's not a water district or PUD in the county. So total shift, total new obligation, you would have to interface with these water associations and become a retail provider of water, taking these over as a receiver until they get, and maybe even end up managing it, doing all sorts of things. This is of concern. PUDA has testified against this and not support.
It's one of the two bills they oppose,
So
outright oppose, not concerns. They're against it.
and the few, I think Stevens County and one other county, if you look through the WPUDA fact sheet about the two testified against it, you had a couple PUD actual step-in Olympians testify against it. At this point, I think we continue to monitor this. Whether we formally go into an opposition, I'll communicate with Chris of whether we do, but I think this is one the PUD should oppose if asked. And if you're asked by the Timmons or Shoemake or any legislators that would say we oppose that, we're not a retail-based water provider, and we're not situated to do that. We shouldn't be asked. The county, and I can wax on why the county from a policy basis should take this responsibility, given they're the ones that have had land use control and health department control over these water systems. And if they're failing, they really should be obligated, given your land use policies.
Well, and I think that kind of the ticking time bomb that's out there is the whole PFAS
Mhm.
regulation. Because you could have a very small water system that needs a $2 to $5 million filtration plant installed to be spread over 15 customers. And that would trigger the financial instability. And that could happen a lot in the future. And we just don't know. It might not happen at all, but there might be hundreds of them. And if you've got a general government organization that's passing regulation, it really ought to be a general government organization that bails them out.
Sure.
And, not that we won't help, we will, and that's one thing we've offered to do with the county, and the county has not moved on our letter of intent or notice of intent that we had with them, to be a consultant that would work with them to figure out the right thing to do in receivership, and the county just hasn't acted on that.
And that is our proactive solution to the problem.
Yeah, it is. And I can't explain, I've pushed and pushed and pushed, but I'm pushing on a string.
So that's Senate Bill 6206. So if you're asked, I would recommend that we oppose it.
The only legislative update for me is that I testified in favor of SB 6039 last week, the geothermal grant program bill introduced by Senator Lovelet and Senator Shoemake. And it passed out of committee, and I believe it got bipartisan support, and it moved out of the Senate, and it's in the House now. So that's moving along. And posted a link to the testimony on the website and did a social media post. So, just a reminder too, that we should do our social media posts, commissioners, since I know we're all busy doing lots of things. Just remember to snap pictures of what you're doing. And then, I don't know, that's it for me on legislative update. I guess that bleeds into geothermal. Do you
I was
wanna
going to
go?
say virtually all of the geothermal update is legislative update.
Yeah, do you want to take it from here?
I can start off anyway. So one of the key things that I want everybody to look at is Senate Bill 5992. And that was proposed in the Senate by Republicans. And it's an interesting bill that WPUDA has concerns. I would recommend that we would oppose. And what it does is it requires something that seems common sense, that for new carbon-free energy sources, that they specify that there's actually a water resource available for their use. And when you think about, for instance, with geothermal, you need cooling water. And so that's common sense. And at some point you would have to provide for the water for cooling. It's interesting that it's proposed and it doesn't cover any new fossil fuel plants. So that's deliberately excluded. And so, that's problematic. But the other thing, and what really got my attention on the bill, was that it also requires documentation and state approval for water needs for transmission projects. So what it ends up with, which is odd, but it ends up with another place where a transmission project can be blocked in a system that's already, 10 to 15 to 20 years deep to get a transmission project approval. Here would be another approval level required. And when you think about the water required for a transmission project, you certify that, hey, if we're going to need water to build a road, it's going to be trucked in. And that may be true and fine and complete in terms of the answer, but challengeable. Somebody will say, well, you didn't address that in your NEPA, or your proof that it's going to come from trucking is not, you need more. And it's just a place where it can be challenged again. And it'll be in front of a state regulator, not in front of a court. And so that means that whatever the regulator rules will be appealed to a court, and you've got another 3 to 5 year delay. And so it's something that I would recommend that we oppose. It just does not fit. There are so many bites at the apple right now for any of these projects. We don't need to add more. Any questions on that one? It was kind of in the weeds. I'm sorry about that. So the next thing is Commissioner Grant talked about the geothermal bill, but we also have a budget proviso that's going through. And what the budget proviso does is it provides funding for the pre-feasibility study. And the sense going through was, number one, that this would be far more favorable if the NUCSAC was the lead, because it would be one of those ones where, people would look at it and they couldn't say no. And it doesn't hurt us at all. We need the study done. It doesn't matter who does the study. And the bill requires the NUCSAC to work in consultation with us. And that gives us the opportunity to help. And we've got, a lot of things that we know about this, a lot of research that we've done. And we're ready to help write the RFP to get the study consultant on board and rock and roll. So very much in support of the budget proviso. I sent the note off to Representative Rammel and Lisa McShane and others this morning, saying that the language that was in there was acceptable to us and we're good to go. So a lot of what we've done has been around the legislative process on geothermal. And kind of the follow-on to that is Commissioner Grant has volunteered to go down and work with our lobbyist, Scott Hazelgrove, and actually lobby directly with some of the lawmakers on Thursday, I believe it is. Yeah, so it's kind of exciting.
Yeah, so I'm doing Energy Northwest on Wednesday, and then Thursday morning, we'll be meeting with key members of the Senate that work on budget. And what was the final number for the budget proviso? Was it $500,000? So, I mean, just really hopeful that that's $500,000 for Whatcom County to start really digging into whether this project can work. And that would be straight out of the Clean Energy Fund funds, right?
That's my understanding where they're looking
yeah.
for, yeah.
So,
Yeah, it actually fits. It's what those funds are supposed to be used for.
yeah. So, I think it's also just a really promising kind of first step with our relationship with the Nooksack tribe. And a lot of questions to be answered as the project moves forward, but, I feel hopeful. So,
And I think we've informed the commission that we've already met with the Lummi as well, and at least introduced them to this. Our lobbyist and Lisa McShane, we're going to be talking to them about meeting with the Saxuatl. They're not necessarily impacted, but it is kind of a watershed that leads into their land. So that's another group that we really want to inform and kind of get their input. So more to follow on that. And it's going to be a long-lasting effort that I hope ends up in a very long-term relationship.
That bill was 6039, was it?
6039,
Okay.
SP 6039. I don't know what the House bill number is.
There is a substitute bill on that now.
Oh, there is.
And
Okay.
they just pull it up. It just had some additions on some deadlines of rulemaking for ecology.
Okay.
And the House
some lease
bill
rate
is
requirements.
2129,
Okay.
and Representative Rammel's the sponsor,
Right, makes sense. Okay.
and Waputa's in support.
Okay.
Any additional children? updates?
Just also that, I think you were there, Jamie, too, that the Whatcom Democrats passed a resolution in support of geothermal on Saturday. So that's a positive momentum too, in terms of these House bills these bills and the budget proviso, hopefully, so.
Well, as part of our ongoing information sharing, I'll be presenting to the Bellingham Rotary next Tuesday. So it'll be another opportunity to get in front of the group and say, here's something that's happening in Whatcom County that could be a very good thing, but at this point, we don't know. We got to go study it.
So, should we move on to the board retreat?
We should.
So, yeah, I mean, thanks everyone for your patience. There's been lots of people we've talked to. And I think we have someone who's joined us who might be a good candidate for helping us with our retreat. I've had a couple of conversations with Karina. And I think both of you commissioners had a chance to
Yes.
talk to Karina, and she prepared a brief proposal. Has everyone seen that brief proposal? Great, and centerpiece of that, I'll let Karina take over from here, if that's okay. Karina, can we get you? Is she?
Oh, yeah.
Promoted to
Yeah.
an analyst.
So while she's doing that, I just say that the centerpiece of this is team building at the PUD. And so with that introduction, Karina, please proceed.
I think she's got to get promoted to.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Panels.
Someone handle that for her. And just a moment, Karina, we're working on it on our end. One of the things that's on the geothermal that's interesting is that there's a couple of bills that are not geothermal energy production, electricity production. They have to do it, geothermal as a heat source.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's important when we look at the bills to not get.
I know, isn't Alex Ramel sponsoring both? of
Yeah,
them? He's
yeah,
like,
he
I'm
was
gonna
named on both of
clarify
them,
this
so-
1,000 times this session.
Yeah, I met with him,
There
Karina's
she
with
is.
us.
Okay, great.
Oh, so can you hear me now?
Yeah.
we can.
That's great. Yeah, I don't have a ton to say other than I've spoken individually with each of the commissioners and have been asked to put my thoughts together on how I would address the current need to build some team and work on culture within the commission and potentially with staff. So in order to approach this problem, I feel like I really need, or this opportunity, I need to do what I call a discovery phase. Have a few more conversations with each of you individually, with some staff and with whomever else you identify as someone who can speak to the current workplace culture at the PUD. And then based on those conversations and potentially a survey that I'd love to deploy, I would design a retreat for you all with the target date kind of unknown. I was told sooner rather than later. But realistically, it'll take a little bit of time to sort of do this due diligence. So early spring feels like a realistic timeline for me. I know in conversations with each of you individually, you all had, each commissioner had slightly different ideas about how to best use a half-day retreat. My proposal, I think, represents kind of the common themes I heard from all three of you. So if there are modifications you'd like me to make, I'm happy to do that. I also think, though, that after that step one discovery phase, I'll be able to present to you a draft agenda that we might be able to tweak, if goals change a little bit. Any questions for me or suggestions about how I might clarify?
Yeah, so I just want to say first that I appreciate your effort. It is a kind of an underspecified problem we're asking you to help us solve. And what I mean by that is that I totally understand that you need to do discovery to be able to provide a more detailed proposal. And I also recognize that requires that you expend some time and resources. And so it occurs to me that in some or another way, the commission has to create the support for those resources. So that's what I wanted to start with.
Chris?
So just two quick things from my perspective. If you guys want to use Karina, and that's one thing I think you can just agree to that verbally here in the meeting, but then direct me to put together a professional services contract and get this on a regular basis real quick, and we can do that.
Great. Well, I thought the proposal looked really good, Karina, and I'm sure that the shape of it will change as you do discovery, and that's part of why you're going to do discovery. And I mentioned this to you yesterday, but just thought I'd mention it again here too, is that maybe a 30-minute conversation with Jim Darling, who did our strategic plan, what was it, a year and a half ago, would be potentially useful just to kind of pick up where he left off, since he was the last person that sort of helped with some of this work. And I'm sure he would be willing to do that. So that's it. I would love to kind of just nod that I would love to pass this off to Chris and get a professional services agreement set up with the proposal that Karina sent.
As would I.
Okay.
Thank you,
Good.
Atul,
Great.
for doing the groundwork on that.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks for your patience and thank you, Karina.
I do have one question, and I don't know if we need to address it now, but I'll be looking to have one person sort of be the identified point person, even if it's just to help me understand how to schedule meetings within the PUD or who I should speak with, etc. So if that's going to be Chris.
That'll be
Yep.
Chris.
We're all
Great.
pointing to Chris.
Yeah, no problem. I can be the chief administrator for this whole thing.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina.
So feel free to stay and enjoy our meeting. But, don't feel
All
any
right.
pressure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the Wapuda Day on the Hill planning discussion. The one question that I have about this is, we had talked about getting sort of bullet points on a handbill for handing out to legislators.
Yep.
Or we will have that
We will.
finished. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Preparing it now would probably be a little bit premature
Sure.
because this stuff's changing so fast, although the budget proposal looks like we've got that nailed down, but you know, where everything else is will change day by day, but yeah, we'll have that roughed out. What I'll do is I'll get that together probably late next week and get it to all three of you for individual comments. Please don't reply to each other, just reply to me. And if there's any editorial changes or anything, we'll be sure and make them and get it back to you guys. So you've got
Okay.
plenty of time.
Are you planning to go down on the 14th for that?
I am not.
Okay.
I'm available to, but I was just looking at the cost of having 4 of us down
Yeah.
there. And then
Yeah.
having nobody here on site.
Yeah, okay.
So it was kind of a logistical thing.
okay, great.
And both of you are planning to go?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm traveling down on the 13th. So, and that is when our commission meeting.
On the 13th.
Yeah, so we'll need to produce obviously final versions of we want a physical document, a card, what do we
Yes,
want?
like
We want
a sheet handbill, like a.
Like a little trifold. Yeah. Yeah, that's what we were looking at. And it's gonna probably cover the geothermal stuff. It's gonna cover the adjudication issues. And, you know, really, I'll try and hit the high points of all the things we're interested in legislatively.
Perfect.
The downside of having a lawn service that actually does the work is you get the noise.
So you'll have a draft to us when?
Hopefully by next Friday, earlier if I can. Now,
Okay,
next Friday is about the 1st of February, 2nd of February. So it's in plenty of time for this, and that'll give us time for a weekend turnaround and then that whole next week before you guys are at the hill.
okay,
Great. So we will all be there for coffee service and then for the barbecue to talk to legislators. Yes.
I will be there for sure.
That's my current plan.
Chris,
Yeah.
we ought to talk about if you're gonna be at a table and having discussions with people coming up, we just made it a special meeting. That the day on the hill,
True, yeah,
you know,
just so we avoid any issues. And then it's a public notice and
Sure. Okay. I'm comfortable with that, yeah.
you and I can talk about that format.
and Ann will help us get it all posted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Anything else on the Wapuda Day on the Hill? No? All right, well, that concludes our old business. So we will move to new business. And we'll start with the approval of the professional service agreement with Cobb, Finley and Associates. And I love that we have all of the memos, action memos included in this packet. It makes it easier.
Right, this one is hosted by Andrew. So Andrew, I'll call on you to defend the product.
Okay, thanks. Hello again, everyone. Really a big step for the Point Roberts project. This is, of course, to approve professional services agreement with Cobb, Finley and Associates. This will get us a construction level plan set that we can use to go out to bid to construct the project. So this will complete all the design engineering work that we'll need. It also give us a bill of materials, so we'll know all the materials that we'll need to purchase, and we'll go out for a public bid for those materials as well. So they are coming in at just over 300,414 and 53 cents to cover everything, which is well within the budgeted dollar amount that we earmarked for this project. And the project would be covered completely by the matching dollars provided as 100% grant from Whatcom County. So we're looking for you all to authorize the general manager to execute the agreement.
One other thing about the design, and this is just hats off to Andrew, there's a couple of different locations that are built into the design. So we have the ability to expand the number of competitors on the network almost at will, and very well done. Andrew.
Thanks.
Great.
Entertain a motion for approval.
I'll make a motion to approve the professional consulting services agreement with Cobb, Bentley and Associates.
So I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, item B, approve professional service agreement with Eagle Eye Aerial Solutions.
And I believe Mr. Wank is here to present on that one.
Good morning, commissioners.
Good
Morning.
morning.
I don't know if you can see me or not.
We can
We can
see
see
you.
you.
Oh, okay, great. So yes, this is a request for a professional services agreement with Eagle Eye Aerial Solutions. And they used unmanned aerial drones to inspect our lines and inspect our substations. This is just a services agreement right now, just to get them back on board. That last year their PSA expired, and it's been a great service having them, because like you might have read in the background, before you'd have to have a crew with bucket trucks, and you'd driving back and forth through everybody's property, and you're getting to each pole, each location, and setting up and then rising in the bucket truck. But here, these guys can do so much more in such a shorter amount of time, which is a great cost savings for the PUD. And this Eagle Eye Aerial, one great thing about them is they're really motivated, and they're trying off a lot of new technologies. And before, they just had a basic drone, and they would just fly up and take pictures. And now they're starting to do LiDAR, and actually apparently they bought a water-based unmanned vehicle, and so they could inspect our inspect our screen intakes potentially in the future. That's a potential service they have. But going back to LiDAR, which is great, because then we can do sag analysis of our lines. And sag analysis is basically if our transmission and electric lines, they have to be tested for hot weather and cold weather and how they sag, and if they're going to be too close to structures. And so that's another service that Eagle Eye can provide. So just requesting to renew their PSA with them.
Questions?
No questions from me. I'll make a motion to approve a professional consulting services agreement with Eagle Eye Aerial Solutions.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Okay,
moving on
thank you,
to.
commissioners. And then
Thank
I
you,
also
thank you,
have
Kurt.
thank you. I have a request for PSA for different engineering firms. We have 3 that have been we've been working with. They all have a solid statement of qualifications. And the reason that we have 3 is they all have a little bit of a different kind of area of expertise. We have, as you know, we have just our on-site facilities, which can be 480 volts, our pumps and motors, all the way up to our 115,000 volt transmission. And so these different firms have a different, like I said, expertise. Right now, we have Toth Engineering, which they responded to our PSA, and we had already made some changes. Brian and I, we worked with them and updated our agreement, and they signed off and said this is totally fine. The other 2, Anvil and Atwell, those we're still waiting on. They've had some more requests that seem just a little more challenging, and so right at this point we're looking that we might have John Sitkin and his team take a look at those. But for now, it's just Toth. And what, like I said, we're trying to have these for support for our electrical engineering.
Thank you. So that was on action, agenda item 7C. If we were following along, approval of the professional service
Thank you.
agreement with select electrical engineering firms. Does anyone have any questions for Kurt in regard to that?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
So, I did review the entire packet, and in the attachment, it doesn't have the amounts. Could you remind me what we're looking at for amounts? For these?
Well, these are all, both of these are just PSAs, and we at a later date will work through actual work orders. with each firm. Right now, we don't have any work orders because we have to generate these PSAs first. I think that John has something that he's building, John Littlefield, electrical system supervisor for Eagle Eye to do some inspections. And then we will have some work orders with Toth Engineering after we get the PSA, and I could follow up with those dollar amounts, but we don't have any work orders right now, so I don't have any dollar amounts.
So typically, if we have a project that needs to be done, we would go back to our approved PSA and say, here's the body of work, give us a bid. And then we would bring that back here for authorization. What this does is it says, okay, we've gone through the competitive analysis of who's the best firm out there to do this kind of work for us. And we haven't given them a body of work to do yet. That makes sense.
Right, it's just not typical that we approve 3 different vendors at the of services.
Well, you've got
I'm just
transmission,
trying to-
substation, and then plant engineering, and they're all 3 very different specialties.
Yeah,
And that's been kind of the problem. We've used plant engineering for some of our distribution work, and that's not worked out ideally.
and the reason we're approving them together is because they're all part of the substation project.
Well, potentially we will probably use all 3 of these if we do a full upgrade on plant 1.
Mhm,
We use them for different parts of the project.
mhm, mhm.
Do
But
we have
it's
to
not
approve
limited to that.
these all separately?
So the work orders themselves, I believe, if they're large enough, come back to you separately.
But as these contracts say, you can do 3 separate motions.
3 separate motions.
Yes, each of the engineering firm will have their own individual professional services agreement.
But right now, we're only bringing cost to you.
So is that the only one you want the motion on, or you want motions on all 3 of them right now?
All 3 were conditioned on final legal review in
Okay.
case they come back. So Toth is the only one that has come back and said, yes, we accept it as written. So you can do all 3 as they're subject to final legal review.
Okay,
I'll entertain a motion.
okay. I mean,
Okay, I'll make, go ahead and make.
oh, go ahead. It's gonna be a mouthful.
I'll make a motion to approve, subject to legal review, our standard professional engineering services agreements with Anvil Corporation, with Adwell Group,
There's just one. So with Anvil,
with Anvil Corporation.
that's the one motion.
Okay, I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 There.
I'll make a motion to approve, subject to legal review, our standard professional engineering services agreement with Atwell Group.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll make a motion to approve, subject to legal review, our standard professional agreement for engineering services with Toth and Associates.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Thanks, commissioners.
Thank you, Kurt.
So to continue fun and games, I'd like to call on Annette and talk to us about our auditor's report.
Good morning. Just to start us all off, following up on that email, we had spoken with the state auditors last Tuesday, and they had indicated that the final report would be done within a couple days, and it hasn't. So I reached out yesterday, and they say it will be published on the 25th. So for those of you who are looking for that report on our website, it will be posted on the 25th. I did provide to the commissioners a draft report, and according to Elizabeth, who I spoke with yesterday, nothing really changed. It still is in draft form, and it has all the draft notices across it. So I didn't want to have that posted yet, but we should get the official one to post both the accountability and the financial audit on Thursday, the 25th. So as the memo said, we met on the 16th for our exit conference, and Commissioner Deshmani was able to attend there. It was a clean audit, which is always the goal. And the reports will bear that out. And then as soon as I get those, I will submit those to our rating agencies and post that on Emma, which is where we have to post all our bond notices and get that up there. They did have a couple recommendations, but they were non-material, so they didn't reach the level of putting them in the letter or the reports. So, yeah, any questions on that?
Can I just say congratulations?
Yeah.
So that's 17 consecutive years, 9 consecutive audits that have been clean. Outstanding in that.
Thank you.
Thanks to you, to Tracy, Stephanie, everybody involved.
Thank you. Yeah, it was definitely a team effort and a lot of annoying Annette questions along the way.
So, thank you, Ned, as well. And you may have seen Chris's email on that subject. During the conference, I asked the auditor some questions. And they were specific in thanking the whole team, and of course, in particular, Annette, for being very timely and very complete in responsiveness. And this, of course, matters a lot to the commission because this has an impact on our credit rating. This has an impact on our creditability. And what that means is that as an organization that's very much looking for growth in a couple of different directions, it's very important that we have a clean shop. And so I thought I'd give a little bit of background to why we're thinking of that. So that's all for me.
One thing I did want to add is we discussed, and especially SAO has kind of have the reference or the guideline that if an entity has over $10 million in sales, they would be on a single year financial audit. We have gotten around that because we've been so clean and because it sounds like their staffing is low, and so they're challenged there. I did request this time through that we do change to that single year financial audit. So we will be looking at another audit this fall, most likely. And the reason is I was hoping to get this done by the end of the year. And that's what I had told our rating agencies with that we're attempting to do, and that did not happen. So single year audit is going to be painful, but it'll be less painful than this last fall. So we'll just have to gear up for that and deal with it. But I think especially with the bond issues we're looking at going forward, it was a good decision.
And there's enough legislation and the GASB rules changes and everything that having a third party take a look at this every year is not a bad thing, because they can give us advice in advance. They can say, hey, here's something that you need to clean up now, so it's not a problem later. And I think that's generally a good thing.
Most likely they will be on a house anyway in the next couple of years, because anytime you go over $750,000 in federal funding, they do a single audit. So Andrew's pretty busy, so I'm expecting a single audit this year and probably next year at least for Andrew's project.
Well, thank you so much, Annette.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank
Thanks.
you. It was a lot of work, but again, it wasn't just me. So. All right, so if we want to move on to the FCS, I have a quick, I promise it's quick, presentation on the rate study. We did get that rate study, as you know. Let me change my pile of notes around. In June of 22, we contracted with FCS Group to do a rate study. And we knew they had told us going in that it was going to be not able to be even started until that fall. I knew that even if they had gotten right on it, we couldn't have finished it before the budget and applied it to the 23 budget. So I said that was fine as long as I get the rate models for the 24 budget, which they were able to provide before they published the last report. So that's a little bit of why that time lag took a little bit longer. But just kind of going through just kind of high level view of what was looked at and what we found during this rate study. And some of this is going to be duplicate because we have had 2 previous rate presentations. In February, Chris and I kind of talked about the theory behind it, And then in September, we kind of talked about a preview of what was going to come out of this. So some of this is going to be a repeat. All right, there we go. So the scope of kind of what the rate study looked at is it just looked at the industrial water and the Grandview, our water systems. You know, they're going to review fiscal policies. Are we assess revenue needs? Are we bringing in enough money to cover what we need, especially including capital funding, what we're budgeting for the next 5 to 10 years? And then establish a defensible basis for our cost allocation. That's how much rate you're going to charge, for example, in the Grandview, the potable customers as opposed to the non-potable customers. Calculate and show a recommendation for a general facility charge. You know, the easy term for that is the connection fee. So if we have a new customer coming on and says, hey, I'd like to connect to your system, what kind of charges do we charge them? And then develop the big, huge Excel financial models that I use to do our budget. All right, so the recommendations that came out of this, obviously the rates need to increase. We already knew that going into budget and all that. One of the things that they discovered, which is kind of messy, is the allocation we've been using. All along, we've been using the O&M labor hours. And what they discovered is what was actually being in all the little Excel links was the total labor allocation, not just the O&M. So we were going to switch to that and phase that in over several years. But then when we were looking at the budget, and especially with the drop of the Healthy Pet, Chris and I discovered, and I mentioned this during our budget, that we switched the allocation based more on sales than labor hours. So that is going to reflect both in the Grandview and the industrial system. That also is going to be phased in over several years. Under Grandview, the general facility charge, that has been changed because in 2019, you know, we connected through the Vista line, the Grandview non-potable system to our industrial water system. We were having all those trouble with the wells and the ponds and all the sediment. So the cleaner and better fix was to connect that to our industrial system. We did. So part of the industrial water assets is now included in the connection charge in Grandview. And then this isn't a revelation, but just on the Grandview side, distinguishing between the fire and the non-potable was a challenge because it's the same system. I keep hearing a little noise. Does somebody have a question? Or is it just my computer? All right.
I think you just your computer's
We're not
chirping
hearing
at you.
it here.
Yeah, okay. So that was a challenge to try and work through because just distinguishing the assets, doing the capacity. I mean, it was a big challenge in this rate study. And on the industrial water side, again, the allocation was an issue that was brought up. The general facility charge, and this was a repeat from the 2015, and it just hasn't been implemented because of the ramifications and how big of a project it is. That's on me. Rewriting our water connection policy, which is actually dates back to September of 1998. But because of all those contracts are tied to that, there's a good chance we would have to address contract changes, and that's a big deal. So, but what they're recommending and what I would like to move to is just one connection fee. Right now, our water connection policy has it so that you get 2 different connection fees. One when you establish that fixed capital, and one when you establish that fixed operating in your contract. So for example, Pacific International had that fixed capital piece, but we're not taking water. So they did not have that fixed operating piece. All the other customers we have had both. They recommend just having one connection fee and being charged when we initially have that contact with the customer. And they also...
We'll have to step back and have a strategic thought about that. One of the reasons why philosophy behind the fixed charge cap, the contract demand versus operating demand was part of our water supply planning on a contractual basis for reservation for the water right consideration in active compliance. So there are some nuanced considerations that will have to expand beyond the financial policy to some broader strategic policies that, and Annette and I haven't shared this recently in recent years, so we just need to revisit that as we go through this.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
It's not an easy one day rewrite. It's a very complicated thing.
Yeah,
And another recommendation, excuse me?
And that, I just want to interrupt for a sec. This is an example of why it took so long for FCS. They are an incredibly knowledgeable organization. And they assumed everything we did was really simple. And as they dug into it, they found that is not the case. And this is a classic example of where, you know, when you look at the reality of what you're dealing with, it's very different than an academic view of things.
I think they actually because we did go through this in 2015 with them. But yeah, you know, this is the Whatcom PUD. You know, everybody looks at it, especially, you know, what really came out is when we initiated the new software system. Oh, you have under 100 customers. Oh, that's easy. They gave us the green project manager and they didn't spend much time, and it kind of, it was a mess. But yeah, it is not easy. It is not a simple system to work with. All right, so in the industrial, they also recommended that we eliminate the fixed fire charge. Right now, we only have 2 customers that get charged that. It's Cornerstone Church and Burlington Northern. We would have to come up with some sort of a substitute. Because the system wasn't designed or built to supply fire needs necessarily. We do have fire hydrants, but it was not designed for that. So we still need to charge those people, but we just need to tweak it a bit and how to do that.
I think we
And
have
so,
standby pipes, not fire hydrants per se.
Yeah,
Just for the record.
they are standpipes, yeah.
Yeah, and Cornerstone is a real unique situation that we should discuss at some point. And I think I understand with only 2, is it worth it? Harkening back, there were some considerations of intent why we did the fire charge separate from the rest. We'll just have to revisit that again. Same, but different kind of strategic, legal, policy, financial considerations.
So the second to last bullet point is what I've touched on, and rewriting that water system connection fee does need to be updated. It's a big job, and it's going to affect a lot of things. And then formalize more water connection policies for both irrigation and the Grandview. Basically, we do not get that many new customers. In Grandview, we get a lot of people changing hands, so changing owners or renters, whatever, tenants of different connections, but not necessarily new connections very often. So formalizing that more is what they recommended. So simple, easy, and this is, again, a duplicate of what you've seen. What they recommend in rate increases versus what I have budgeted in the 24 budget. Overall, I'm a bit more conservative. They are recommending getting more cash up front. I am having more of a slower approach. And the reason is because a lot of our capital projects still aren't 100% solid. And so like the timing, the dollars, those aren't 100% solid. So that's why I'm a little bit more hesitant to totally increase them. Plus, you know, the increase is, you know, it's a shock. So we try and smooth that as much as possible. And on the expenses, you'll see differences here. And basically the differences on these are on the industrial water, we push back those bonds again due to timing on the big plant 1 rebuild back until 2025. And then the water treatment plant 1 costs have increased. So that was a little bit of the change there, you know, in the gray section and the industrial water is where a lot of the differences. And then over in Grandview, again, it's in the debt. In the 23 bond, or excuse me, the 23 budget, I had the Grandview taken a loan from the electric system because we had those three, if you remember, kind of fuzzy projects that we weren't sure were going to go through. They didn't really go through. Two of them are, I believe, off the board, a line extension and a road crossing, but we do have some land acquisition that we are still working on, but it didn't come through last year. So that again is basically the difference there in the orange and the gray on the Grandview side is just the timing of the debt and the amount. Now the general facility charge, to be quite honest, was a huge part of our, the last section of our rate study, discussions going back and forth. At a 10,000 foot level, it's not that complicated. When you get down to it, it is complicated. So at a 10,000 foot level, basically what you do is you take the value of your system. So like our original cost of all our assets, and then you can apply 10 years worth of interest on top of that. And then you have a denominator and you divide it up by some means. And on the industrial side, it's actually a little easier because we have all the contracts. So we can divide all that up by what the contract amount, the MGD per day is. And that's what we have done. And then you can allocate it out to the customers based on what their contract, the new customer's contract says. So that in essence is pretty simple. Getting down into the weeds, it's not. So on the industrial side, coming up with the capacity that our system can handle actually was more complicated than you would think. And what we discovered was the pinch point is actually our transmission lines. So our Alder Grove and our Douglas Road Commission or transmission lines are limited to a 14 MGD. So that limits our whole system to basically a 28 MGD at currently. So using that as a denominator, it really increased our connection charge. We had used a higher piece, and then there was a whole discussion because what is really the capacity? You know, you can run those lines higher than that, but on a sustainable basis, that's not what you want to do. So where's that number? Where's that sweet spot that you want to do? On the Grandview side, it was even more complicated because the non-potable and the fire were not really easily separated. Trying to come up with that and trying to come up with a denominator on those systems was a challenge. So what we ended up with on the fire was a per parcel. So how many parcels are in that Grandview system that we serve was the denominator in the fire. And then on the non-potable, it also, what I had alluded to earlier, it does now include some of that industrial water assets because that is a piece of those industrial water assets are now serving that non-potable system over on the Grandview side. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Mhm.
Annette, can you just, what did you say was the pinch point for the system capacity for the industrial water?
Right now, it's the transmission lines. So there are 24-inch transmission lines going out to Cherry Point from the two plants.
Okay. Water transmission lines.
Right.
Correct. So we can intake more.
Got it.
Yeah, so we can intake more, we can treat more, we can push out more, but those lines are the pinch point right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is the kind of the highlights of what that rate study has. The rate study will go into a lot more detail and it gets kind of technical, but that's kind of the highlight of the summary of what the rate study came down with. Any other questions?
Yeah, so when do we imagine our next rate study will happen?
You know, Chris had said at one time, you know, you do it every 5-ish years, but it also
3 to 5.
okay, 3 to 5. If there's a significant system change, I would recommend doing one then. And it had been a while, plus we also had that connection between the industrial system and the Grandview system. So that was kind of the impetus for pushing this one forward.
Yeah, clearly, if we do major reconstruction of plant one and get new customers, that would be what I would consider to be a triggering event. But also, if you look at the timing of that, you're out 3 to 5 years. So you're kind of there.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was wondering, and way I would put it also is that you've done a really good job with Chris, with the forecast of capital improvements that could or could not happen. And it seems like there's a lot of thinking happening right now at the PUD about what that's going to look like. So I wanted to make sure that we might be doing the next study sooner rather than later.
Mhm.
I also wanted to mention that I forwarded to you, Chris, and Annette, a presentation that was given at the last food education session. I thought it was a really good
I
presentation.
forwarded it out this morning.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you.
That's what I was referencing earlier.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, I enjoyed it. And it's hard to get your head around all the complexity of these studies. And I appreciate that
Well, and one
we're
thing,
doing it.
we tried to do was give you the real background. So the FCS study assumes bond right. And what we tried to give you was the bond right view that underlies the FCS viewpoint. And then FCS does a great job of putting together the complexity of these in a general way.
Mhm.
That was a very good presentation. Thank you for sending it out.
Okay.
And I gotta say, the thought that's gone into the capital budgeting around here, what I've done is daylight the thinking of others, John Littlefield, Kurt Wank, Brian,
Yeah.
all of Devin, all the folks that are doing this on a day-to-day basis that really, they know our system, they know what we need to do, and they're just doing a great job. And the more accurately we surface that in the budget process, the better it is for our customers, the more controllable rates are, and the fewer surprises we all get. So my hats off to the team.
It's just important while we're thinking about all these studies that we make sure that, and that also plans their vacation days too in advance then.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing around the fall, that sounds like.
Thank you, Annette.
All right,
more
thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna interject one update, and while Andrew's on that, I got an email from Chris Quinn at the county. The franchises will be introduced on February 1st at the county council. So I would expect the public hearing and then action probably on the 15th. I'll coordinate with Chris when we get.
That's not.
Next, we'll have the operations report. Is that Brian or Kurt?
Oh, that's
Kurt?
me this time. Hello again, commissioners.
Hi.
So I'm going to talk about Frazzle. We're all aware of the weather that we just went through. First off, I just want to say a great thanks to the crew. As usual, they stepped up when conditions went sideways on us, and I can't thank them enough for how professional they are and how much hard work that they put in when we run into these really just crazy conditions. It's amazing what these guys do. So I just want to start off with that, but I'm just going to kind of give you a quick rundown on what we experienced and what kind of things that this crew of ours works through when this happens. Thursday, January 11th is when this really kicked in for us. The river temperature dropped 7 degrees in 24 hours, which when you think about a large moving body of water, that's quite a temperature change.
Rain.
I know we've all seen the river get colder, our lakes get colder, but to see it drop that fast in that period of time is pretty amazing. And then what happened is early on the 12th, Friday the 12th, all the river gauge from Northwest River Forecast it flatlined. It was 32 degrees. And what we started seeing high turbidity alarms at our plants. The wind was kicking up. And even though we're still putting out contract demand NTUs of our water, the surface water is stirring up from all this wind. And the other issue we ran into is the BP ponds out inside the Cherry Point BP area. Their pond levels started dropping down, and that's when we knew that we were running into real problems. What we were seeing is the ice starts forming on our screens at both facilities, and we have a real problem bringing in water into our intakes. So on the 12th, again on Friday, that's when we really start. We have wind, we have the river drop down. I think, what frazzle is, I'm sure we've talked about this plenty. It's not a surface layer of ice. It's ice throughout the whole water table. It's from the surface all the way down to the floor. So one of the things we do is we increase our blow-offs, our air compressors, where we're pushing air out. We run to 70 seconds at plant 1 and 65 seconds at plant 2. Then we bring in extra compressors as well. We have backups. These guys have been through it so many times. We know we need backups to our backups. And then on Saturday, we had one of our compressor valves fail on us. Plant 2 was almost lost completely. We have BP calling us saying, "Hey, we're not getting water anymore. What's going on out here?" And I came up. We had electrician support came up to the facility, and because our guys are well prepared, they had in stock replacement valves for our compressors. I have in my notes that they were like a NASCAR crew. I showed up and they worked out a plan. They went down to the intake, and it wasn't 10 minutes later, and they were like, "Okay, let's turn it back on," because they had already swapped out the valve. Like I said, these guys are amazing. And then it was just all through the weekend. There's always an issue. There's frozen fuel lines. The compressors are dropping offline. It's funny. It's funny now. One of the things that happened is one of our compressors were failing, and they said the rental facility says, "Oh, we have one at BP. We'll bring it out there." And the guys were saying, "I can't believe the difference in these two compressors." The one that they brought out from BP, every connection, every valve was brand new. The ones that they had sitting for us was a little bit beat up. They were working, but it's just when you look at the difference in the maintenance when they bring one from BP, it's kind of funny. And then on Sunday we had an additional what did I call it? Just a little extra fun. Apparently there was a fire somewhere on Grandview Road near Portal Way, and I guess the fire department came out and the hydrant didn't work. I don't know why, but so I guess they drove away after the fire was out and left that hydrant on. And so a couple hours later, it actually unfroze. And then Ron Hacker, our on-site operators, everything starts, all of his wet wells start dropping. He's losing water. And he's checking everything. He has no idea what's going on. And he drives out, he drives the line to figure out what's going on. And he sees water everywhere on Grandview Road, and it's ran across the road. Somebody before he got there came and turned it off. But that was after it went over Grandview Road. It scoured out underneath the hydrant. Nothing that was bad, just scoured out some dirt and went to the storage facility across the way, and there's people milling about going, "Where's all this water coming from?" So that got turned off, and everything was fine there. But like I said, that's just the little extra things that these crew have to deal with that no one would expect. These things that you never account for. And so then we made it through the weekend, and then Tuesday the 16th was our last night with 24-hour crews. They worked until Wednesday, and then Wednesday the 17th there was no overnight crew. They slowed down our compressor cycle from, I think they went from 60 seconds to about 15 minutes, and they kind of, at that point, the river surface is starting to freeze over the top. And then at that point, of course, not out of the woods, but everything kind of stabilizes at that point. And right now we're back to normal shifts. We have a little bit of ice on the little bit of ice on the basins, but that's all kind of going away now. Kind of couple last points. Our new compressor that we have, our permanent installed compressor at plant 1 worked great. It was our first true test of it, and it performed quite well. So that's good news there. Couple final thoughts is every time this comes up, Devin Crabtree always says to me, we need basin covers, which is something that we're working on out, trying to, Garrett and I are trying to figure out how we can maybe get some basin covers for the basins here at plant 2. And I know that there was reports done before I got here, but a storage at Cherry Point would be something that I know that our crew is always asking for. And then another item that we discussed just yesterday was if we can figure out some way to keep our intake screens clean during this, some additional activities that could be performed. We use our blow-offs, which I've been actually just in contact with the facility from Lake Erie. I just got an email back from somebody, and they do similar. They use large compressors for blowing off, and so we're using kind of not a standard practice, but a lot of what other people use. And so, but we're always looking for new solutions without putting a small fusion reactor out here to run our waste heat into our intakes.
I can't
But,
imagine you suggested that.
I'll let Chris work on that. But like I said, we're out of it now. Again, thanks to the crew, they're amazing. And then I'd like to know if you guys have any questions.
Questions?
Well, Chris, have you looked at sonication?
Actually, you need to ask Kurt, but he's looked at everything
Okay.
and scanned the literature, and he's even entertained nutty stuff from me. And
Cool. Well, yeah, you can entertain one more nutty idea from me. So yeah,
You
there's
say-
ways of
did you-
vibrating screens
You say
with
sonic,
with
okay.
sound. Yeah,
Take
So-
a note here.
maybe.
No questions from me, just thanks to the crew. It's amazing what the weather does to infrastructure when it gets that cold. And, stories from all over the region about different organizations struggling, and just really happy that we were able to problem solve through so many challenges, and hope everybody gets to recover a little bit now that the mild rain is back.
What do you guys think about putting frazzle ice on our thing that we take lobby day? It's a unique thing. And there's a picture that's
well, maybe we can put a picture on the trifold, but we're not asking for any legislative action on it.
no, I know.
I think it'd be a cool social media post. I know it's when you're in the thick of it, that's the last thing you want to do, but it's kind of maybe it's neat to say, we made it through. I know several organizations have had some big challenges that they had to deal with this weather, so. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, we'd had some pipes burst too, yeah.
They do.
Yeah,
Great.
nothing else for me.
Thank you, commissioners.
Kurt.
Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are moving on to commissioner reports. John and I spoke earlier. We are still planning to change the format of this, right? We'll have, yeah, the per diem forms, yeah.
I just fell behind with the
Yeah.
weather, holidays and other stuff that didn't get it and forgot to get it done today. So we'll get it on to next commission meeting too.
But just to be clear, we'll have a form,
Yeah.
right, where we.
Anne's drafted a form,
approve.
so we just need to go
Yeah.
over that and tee it up. and bring it.
Okay.
I mean, the idea would be, it would be in the package, so you'd be able to look at it ahead of time.
Wonderful,
Then it can be just a routine thing.
sure.
I can go first. I just am going to Energy Northwest and then spending Thursday morning. I think Scott's got me has 5 hours of meetings on Thursday related to this budget proviso. So he's gonna keep me busy. And then retroactive per diem request. I got a call from Andrew Redding Friday evening and said, did you know you and Chris are on the agenda for the general membership meeting of the Whatcom Dems tomorrow morning? And I was like, no, we had no idea. But I was able to just jump in and do it. So that was not on my radar at the last meeting. So,
Well, I was
letting
there.
know.
I did a fantastic
Oh.
job. Thank you.
yeah, I was glad I was available. Yeah, so, and then I think that's all, so I think one of the things that's hard with the per diems too is that sometimes things kind of crop up in between, but as far as right now, the Energy Northwest and my day and at the Capitol are the two things I've got going.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And the only new thing that I have is I'd like to go to the adjudication webinar that Ecology is doing. I forgot exactly what day that is. So it's that, of course, the regular stuff, the Pluto, PPC and all of that. So, and yeah, I've got EDI next week too, so. Okay.
The adjudication webinar is coming up soon.
Yeah,
Next
can
week.
someone send an email out about
I'm
what
looking
that?
for when that is.
Yeah, I was trying to find it quickly, but I couldn't. And
There's one on the 26th.
That's-
I think I'm looking at their website.
just some quick comments about Waputa last week.
There's one on the 26th.
Yeah.
And there's one on the 30th. They're all over. There's one on the 31st. There's one on the 31st.
There's one that they referred to at this week at the Water Resources Advisory Committee. I made notes on it, but I don't have them with me.
They have an online informational session on the
At
31st
5:30.
at 5:30 PM on the 31st.
Yeah, that's
And you'll be representing us there or just
no,
watching,
just watching.
attending?
I'm not gonna say anything.
Okay.
Just for some real quick comments, that we didn't cover today at the Buddha meetings. Mia Gregerson has a couple of bills. They're entering late. They're not getting a lot of attention, so I don't think that the digital equity thing is gonna really move much this session. But there are some bills, 2313 and 2327 House bills. To make progress on digital equity. It's becoming clear that the way the BEAD funding is directed and it's going to obviously improve digital equity whenever you increase service. But it's really not addressing the economic to any significant direct. It's part of the, I'm sure it's better, things will get scored higher. But it's going to be a minor impact, in my opinion. Moving on, Chris Walker presented, and he talked about they're preparing a consortium proposal, and that's why we'll see what their specifics are and whether there's any benefit from us leveraging those proposals. But there's plenty of time because this summer is going to be the challenge process. The next few months are going to be the challenge process. So we won't be really having to make decisions about the specifics of our proposals until a little bit later in the year. Deputy director is about to be hired. I think they're getting close to making a decision on that front. Water. There's a couple of water bills that address the foster legislation. There's like a mild one and then a more aggressive one. The mild one's looking good, and that one's by Senator I'm forgetting the name. Can someone help me on the name of the? Okay, so the thing is that I'm trying to we didn't talk about it today, and I know we've got more pressing things on the waterfront on adjudication, but I'm curious about whether we have any guidance on whether we get involved with the foster fix legislation or not.
I think we're kind of letting the Washington Utility Council kind of drive that rather than spending our time and effort on that. We kind of trailing behind their weight. No real different position on it. Sarah Mack is monitoring it. As we feel we need to submit a comment, we work with Sarah to do.
Okay. So it's kind of like, I think we've got so much on our plate regarding legislation. It's not.
Yeah. And I would expect that what's going to happen is at some point in the adjudication process, there's going to be a project proposed that actually makes wet water. And when that happens, it'll run afoul of the Foster decision in a bunch of different, very specific ways. And that'll be, I think, the impetus for us to go back with a basin-specific legislative fix for that project. And I think that's really gonna be our triggering point.
And in a
We're a few
way,
years away from
in
that.
a way, this more ambitious bill, that's unlikely to pass, honestly, is a placeholder for a time when I think that it'll be easier to do a basin-specific piece of legislation, because I'd love for Whatcom County to be the lead as a result of real water supply solutions, to be a lead, and so that we can figure it out
Mhm.
and find a balance between what the tribes, the environmental community, and obviously the water, people who need water, finding those compromises. So I guess that's it on water. And on energy. Yeah, it was a pretty positive story on the WPUDA funded energy efficiency. The transfer cost for solar study. To get to a point where both people that were opponents to more penetration of renewables and people who are proponents of more penetration of solar and other renewables were able to find a common ground through this Commerce Created Technology Advisory Group. And the key outcomes of that were that there isn't a widespread agreement that there is a transfer of cost from those people who don't have renewables in a utility to those who do have renewables, if you price the electricity as retail.
Yeah.
So the price of the electricity, if you put solar panels on your roof, should eventually get to a point where it's not retail. I personally, full disclosure, am benefiting from the Swedes deal. But that's, as an early adopter, I guess that's why I got that deal. But as time is going on, we're seeing more and more the pricing of solar, trying to find a price point that's below retail, but still not wholesale. And so it's somewhere between wholesale and retail, and exactly where that is remains to be determined.
And E3 wrote that huge report, but they didn't come up with a number. They didn't ever do the math for what that rate should be.
Well, and I think E3 would argue that it's gonna be utility specific. That's
Yeah,
kind of the
and
problem
that's
they
really
were
what
running
were saying.
into.
Okay,
Yeah, that question was asked,
okay.
and then really the answer was it's
Cause I read it or I skimmed it and was disappointed. I mean, yeah, I would have hoped that they would
That's
have
really the
taken a
question.
stab at a number, but so you think that's why it needs to be
Yep.
utilities.
And, when you look at the E3 study, one of the areas where you get full recovery was in Seattle City Light, which is kind of odd, but then you think about it and they have the highest rates around. Makes sense. You get full recovery if you get retail reimbursement at a very high rate. So it was, it's just an example of how the cost structure in a given utility really dictates what's retail and what's wholesale and what's in between.
Last thing I have to share is that there was extensive discussion on Thursday morning was a PPC meeting where they talked about the Columbia Basin negotiated settlement. There's a better acronym than that. The PPC meeting that morning, which I wasn't able to attend because I was at WPUDA meetings, talked extensively about that. It was the Energy Committee meeting was 2.5 hours, and 1 hour of the meeting was about the whole Snake River Dam thing and the settlement. And the thing that was most remarkable about that 1 hour long discussion is that there are in WPUDA commissioners who are for immediate reaching. And there are certainly commissioners who think that we should never, ever. And I would say the majority of commissioners are not in favor of reaching, the super majority, I would say. But having said that, there was not one commissioner who liked the settlement. And the reason that no one liked the settlement agreement is because it's a kludge. It feels like a kludge kind of last minute. We got to do something. The judge needs a decision. We got to pull something together that makes everybody happy. And for that reason, it really doesn't seem to be like a proposal that anybody in the public power committee likes. And why that? Well, I just wanted to share that even though I think as Whatcom PUD, we are definitely more on the left on that issue, more towards reasonable pathways for um, reaching. It's fair to say that the problem here is that the old adage, nothing about us without us. And to exclude the public park community from the discussions is a perfect example of making policy, writing policy that not only affects the Snake River Dam system, but affects the entire Columbia River system. That agreement goes way beyond the Snake River dams. It actually addresses fish management all throughout the entire system. And so it's I just wanted to share that. You know, and I'm going to speak to my personal opinion. My personal opinion is that PPC is actually doing a pretty darn good job of objectively sharing facts that relate to the implications of this proposed settlement. So that's my message.
Great. Thank you. Got about 5 minutes to wrap up the public meeting. I also attended the WAPUDA meetings. I think Atul did a pretty good job of summing up the meetings I was in as well. I have water. And I also really appreciated the rate study that they did that you had shared the communication with. And I think it was really beneficial that earlier we had a rate study sort of 101 with Chris, so that it was easier for me to follow along. That's it for me. Oh, we have to move to public comment. I don't see any people.
Oh, I just forgot to say, I did hop on for the board of directors thing on Friday. So, and that is a nice one to get like the recap of the
Yeah.
whole thing. So it's been good for me since I have been a Waputa delinquent for the
Well,
last
and you're
year.
busy with energy. North.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I forgot to offer that I did do a CLE or education presentation to the Building Industry Association on the Winooksec adjudication but how that's going to affect the building community. Interesting. There was a few Lummi fishermen in attendance, and so I had some feedback on my comments, which was positive in the sense they said, you know, we were surprised everything was fair and balanced in our presentation. But it's good to hear.
As to public comment, I can't see a list of the guests, so I can't see if anyone is raising their hands online. It doesn't look like there's anybody raising their hand, so we will go ahead and close the public meeting and go into executive session.
Yeah, we'll be there at probably 9:30, and if we need an extension, or excuse me, 10:30. If we need an extension, we'll let you know at 10:30. My only question is, do you want a 5-minute break?
Yeah, I would love.
Sure.
Yes.
Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 10:02 or 3, and we'll expect to be done at 10:30. If not, we'll do an extension. I'll just text Ann on the extension
Great.
or email. Stop the recording.
All right, you are back on.
Okay, back on. We're going to executive session until 10:30 for potential litigation and a general manager review. We'll go into executive session now, so we can end the recording. Thanks.
Okay.
Turning the meeting.
I just wanted.
Yeah, right.
We're ready to have you adjourn the meeting. Yeah, we're adjourning the meeting.